Hello, everybody. I hope you're ready for this second episode in the current series of On the Settee, which is called Carving Narratives. So just to start off, I want to welcome you not only onto the Settee, but also into the Front Room, which is a long-term, ambitious neighbourhood platform in Birmingham to be designed, grown and co-owned by local communities. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, welcome, hello. I'd like to give you some insight into what On the Settee is. So in the Front Room, the Settee offers a place of sanctuary, a place where you can take a load off, and on our Settee, you'll discover conversations that slot into your day, like a catch up with an old friend, like your favourite song, or something that just makes you feel at home, open, yet vulnerable and connected to other people. So this series is around storytelling. So storytelling is a powerful means of fostering connections among people, between ideas and experiences. When it comes to our communities, our countries and our families, we understand intuitively that stories we hold in common are important parts of the ties that bind us together, as well as the importance of space for many viewpoints and ideas to meet. In this series, we'll be connecting with people who use the art of narrative throughout their work to connect, educate and share the experience of themselves and others, steering away from kind of monolithic narratives by sharing celebration, pain, love and everything in between. Part of this series, also documentation plays an important role, and this series of conversations moves between still image, moving image and the written word to consider different ways that stories can be archived and shared, as well as how we kind of feel that we can do that. So I'm your host, Danni Ingram, also known as Zazu or Zaz, and today I'll be speaking to Rico Johnson-Sinclair, who is a film producer, filmmaker, and programmer. Hello, Rico.
Hey everyone, how you doing today?
Good. I just want to let everyone know that our Q&A is open, so if you are here with us on Zoom, you can drop us some questions in the Q&A. If you're watching via YouTube, for some reason our comments aren't working, but you can tweet us at the Front Room, which is _ the Front Room. Tweet us any questions and they will be directed to me, and then I will direct them to Rico. So yes, all right, Rico. Let's start. If you could just give us a wave, say hello, tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we can get cracking on the juicy stuff.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm Rico Johnson-Sinclair. I've got my fingers in a lot of pies at the moment. So I am the director and former lead programmer of CineQ, which is a queer film festival that prioritises the perspectives of queer, trans and intersex people of colour. I've had a 6-year career in film so far, and also in the arts and culture sector, specifically with queer film and queer art. I was previously festival manager of Shout Festival, and I have produced a BFI network funded film called Sweet Mother, and I'm currently working for the inclusion team at the BFI in Stephen Street in London.
Ooh, and we will get into that more soon. Okay, so I've got loads of things that I want to ask and talk about, but we have a short space of time. So the first thing that I kind of wanted to kind of get into is there's something about your journey that really interests me, because it all kind of like starts with storytelling. And I am going to definitely quote you in this question too. But there's kind of, something about that storytelling coming through your programming, or like film events. So a really good place to start is something that you said to me a couple of days ago. And it was that like everything you love starts with written word. So I just wanted to, ask if you can kind of make some comment on some of those everythings. Like, what were those things that were influencing you that were from the written word? yeah, it'd be really nice to kind of start there from the beginning.
Okay, cool. So I guess to start at the beginning, I'd have to take myself back to like 6, 7, 8-year-old Rico, and then on to like 10, 11-year-old Rico, where I come from a low-income background, single-parent background. That our only household income was benefits, and so there was a lot of like escapism needed during that period of time. But because we like I have a younger autistic brother, so like severely autistic and non-verbal, and my mom spent a lot of her time, I guess, trying to tend to Danico, my younger brother's needs, and therefore there wasn't a lot of time for the rest of the siblings, me and my sister. So that escapism came from books, really. I used to go to the library. Like at the beginning, I didn't have what was necessary to have a library card, so I stole books from the library. But I returned them. I stuck them out and I stuck them back in. And then I would love summer because I could stay up later and read, because I wasn't allowed like a torch or anything, because it was just a nuisance. So like summer would be the time where the sun would set later, so I'd stay up reading, and then in the darker months I'd like sit there and strain my eyes, which is probably why I need glasses now. I love stories to an obsession, and I love getting lost in stories, almost to the point where, I mean, there were periods of time, like 4-week periods of time, where I would read all the books that I took out of the library. I had no more books, and I'd have to start writing books. And I wouldn't be writing books because I wanted to write. I would write books because I needed something to read. So I'd write the stories that I wanted to read, and then I would read them back, and that would be the same experience as like writing these books. And within that, I started to emulate the language of those stories, and I guess that's where the seed was planted in me about being a writer and bringing the things that exist in my head onto page to become something tangible. And that really kind of stayed with me throughout my career, throughout my whole progression. And reading and film now is still something that I endeavor to like engage with whenever I feel like I need escapism, like coronavirus, for example, this year. Like so much happening, so much trauma, like universally felt trauma, and sometimes you need that break from it, and like stories are the perfect way to do that. But then additionally, understanding things like so I'm openly gay and queer and black, and my experiences when I came out to my family were pretty negative, and they stayed pretty negative, but there was a definite difference between like before the household watched like a gay storyline on soap opera, and after it watched a gay storyline on soap opera. So I became really interested in like, what was it about that thing that wasn't me, that soap opera, that story, that made my family treat me differently when before they were pretty anti me being gay. And so I began to realize the power of stories as well, especially for communities that haven't had similar experiences. For example, we look at the shift that a lot of Black films have had in the last 2 years. And personally, my shift when I watched things like Tongues Untied by Marlon T. Riggs, which talks explicitly about Black people loving Black people being revolutionary, and allowing me to unpack some of my own internalized homophobia and internalized racism to really kind of like figure myself out. So your stories can be incredibly powerful, but they're also a way to escape. And I really wanted to pursue that because I think the world needs more joy, but also the world is full of trauma, so it needs little spaces you can escape to. And I think that's probably where, like jumping a little bit, but with CineQ, it's always been about that space, that safe space, because more safe spaces are needed, especially for people who have experienced trauma in their younger years, because we need places of respite, we need places to express.
And those spaces to like unpack and figure out what some of that is. It's really interesting that you kind of touched on how stories were almost a space for you to start questioning certain things, i.e., why is it that this storyline of this gay couple is more accepted by like my family than me in actual fact here, right? And there's something really interesting about that when we talk about the power of stories. It's almost like you are allowing people to have a a glimpse of something that allows them to take space to understand, whereas like sometimes when it is right there in front of them, it's real, that's reality, there's no buffer. But it's just really interesting anyway, because I guess family dynamics really tie into the stories we have about ourselves, right? And like our own experience and what that means in the world. And we will go on to watch a clip of a film that you produced. And we will get onto that, we'll get there. It's just really interesting to hear you even speak about this, like these moments. I just remember like I could imagine young Rico just like going into like a library and being like, this looks
that was dead. That's how it was. And also I think like it feeds into my kind of like relativity, like and whether or not everything is connected, because actually like that experience of me having to go in and like, you know, steal books and bring them back was instrumental in like my spirituality and expanding my spirituality, because my home was really like Christian. But then I remember this time I went into the library and I was like on graphic novels at the time, because I needed respite from the meaty books. I think I just read Noughts and Crosses and was like, okay, yeah, I need something that's a little bit lighter than that, because that was a little deep and I was a little too young to absorb the real meanings behind it. I was like, this is an interesting concept. And I took out all these graphic novels and found one about Wicca, which is like, you know, spirituality, witchcraft, and a religion, and the religion around that, and like read that, and it kind of expanded my mind about what spirituality is and allowed me to think outside the confines of Christianity, which is almost monopolized my whole upbringing. I was like, God, the devil, like these two things exist, which helped instrumentally when I came out at like 13 years old, because I literally didn't know there was anything wrong with being gay. Like it wasn't spoken about to such a degree in my household. Like everything that was gay was edited out so severely that when I fell in love, because I did fall in love with the first person that first guy I'd fall in love with, I didn't realize that the thing that I felt that felt so pure could actually be wrong. So when I kind of like did all the innocent things like writing a letter and like leave that letter on my bed and my mum read it, and seeing my mum's reaction to that was the only time I was like, oh shit, I've done something wrong here. And so allowing myself, especially when my mum was so religious, and be like, it's wrong, like you're going to hell, for me to be like, well, actually, I've read enough to know that might not necessarily, that might not be the case. And so like, yeah, I'm really thankful for my journey. And it also that kind of those patterns continued as I went on. Like the things that I did that subvert the way that you're supposed to live are ultimately the things that give me the knowledge to be able to think conceptually and broadly about the world. And so that I find that really interesting.
And there's something there about like allowing stories to like influence like how we see different parts of the world, right? And like seeing those stories as just a little insight into something, but also like a snippet of something that we might just not know. And I think that does give you some kind of let's say like, I don't know, there's something that gives you a bit of intrigue to the world and what different parts look like, especially if we're kind of if you've grown up in a certain type of household, or you're just around like certain people or whatever, there's always something that happens, right? And you're like, oh, what?
Yeah. And like, I think it's definitely more prevalent in stories than it is in film. And that's why, like, the thing that I find in stories is, in stories, you're living in someone's head. In film, you're living externally to someone, which is why, like, in my practice, like, what I want to try and do is develop ways to externalize what someone is thinking internally in film form. So like thinking about my own experiences with psychosis and auditory and visual hallucinations, like how do I examine those in a film context? Do I use sound design to make sure that auditory hallucinations are a part of the sound design for the whole film? And I guess from like one of the main parts for me when I was like, wow, like stories really can change the way you view the world, is obviously I was talking about my younger brother who was severely autistic and nonverbal. like understanding that with my adult brain. Now I understand the trauma that I experienced when I was younger, but actually like living alongside Danica was really, really difficult because of his needs, his access needs. And I remember reading The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. And like really that book is set out in a way that allows you to explore, it wasn't similar to Danica's experience from what I experienced externally, but it was a, you know, someone on the spectrum that was thinking about the world in a completely different way, but also the book, the way it was laid out, the way it was formed, allowed you to take this journey at the same time. So by the end of that book, I was like, I have a better understanding of neurodiversity now than I had in the 10 years previous, living alongside someone that was neurodiverse. And so that was really interesting for me. So yeah, like a lot of my stories are all about like how I can take internal emotions, internal thoughts, and make them real. But that is a journey, because I feel like there are different artistic ways to do that, and some of them are super pretentious and inaccessible. But the reason that I love film, and the reason that I chose film instead of like being a novelist, or, well, for one, it's more employable than sitting at home, and there's more support than sitting at home writing a novel and hoping it gets published, because, you know, a girl's got to eat.
Yeah, gotta make that next back.
But then at the same time, I think that more people access film than read books now, and that's a sad thing. It is a sad thing, but like film, you go to a film, you enjoy a film, they're beamed into your house through Netflix and Amazon Prime, and then you can go to cinema, which is another problem in itself, because cinemas are so expensive that they're inaccessible. But you have such a wealth of film around you that it's such a great way to tap into those communities. So if, for example, if I wanted to talk to a bunch of white people that had never experienced what I would consider real trauma before, about the traumas of being Black, or the traumas of being specifically me, or my experiences, the things that I've experienced, then film would be a great way to do that.
Yeah.
And actually what I've realized is people that have less trauma in their lives watch a lot more independent film that's based on realism, and people that have experienced trauma watch a lot more fantastical films. Like, that's what I've realized, unless you're an artist, and then you kind of sit outside of that because you've learned a way to turn your trauma into your art practice. So you've externalized it yourself, which I find, again, really interesting.
Yeah, I think even you mentioning kind of like sometimes the ways that film can be like inaccessible, let's say the cinema. I think the cinema is probably like a good like example to use, because a lot of people, you know, have like these real like captivating memories about like the first time they went to the cinema, or like the cinema that's closest to them, and all of these types of things, because it's also part of like an outing as well, isn't it? It's like you are going to this place, you are going into a different atmosphere, and my kind of entrance into being really interested in film was really kind of around my aunt, like always just like watching random things and like taping them on like video and being like, hey, we're watching this. And I'm like, what? Okay. And, you know, also kind of having a job working in the cinema, which meant I had like 2 free tickets a week, which meant I was like, oh, okay, I can just go and see anything, right? And there's something about that little bit of like access made me go to the cinema. I'd go and see things that I wouldn't necessarily be interested in, but I'd be like, well, I've got this free ticket, why not? Yeah. And there's something about that kind of allows people to just go, and it just is a normal thing. Right. And access is really important when we're talking about that.
Absolutely. Like, listen, the industry has some work to do. Some real work to do. Like my first experience of going to the cinema was to watch Recess Schools Out, and it was a weird experience. I think I was about 9, so a little bit older than Recess. No, actually, Recess is around that age. So yeah, I went to go and watch Recess. It was a completely new experience for me, but it was also jaded by what was going on around it. So my experiences of film were film for, because we were a low income family, like single income, benefits only. Like, we couldn't afford to go to the cinema at all. And so, like, I say this all the time, and I probably shouldn't because I work in the industry, but like, whilst I appreciate that piracy damages the
I
film.
knew you were going to talk about piracy. I was like, yeah, there we go.
Like, I appreciate like piracy damages the film industry, but equally, I know that without piracy, I would not be working in the industry right now because I wouldn't have had access to film. If I was waiting for the good films to come on Film 4, like I think one of the first films I watched on Film 4 as well was Battle Royale, which is just kind of like the Japanese film Battle Royale, where they're on the island and they have to fight to the death. So that jaded my experience of Film 4 completely. But then I really started engaging with piracy, and at first it was the DVD man down the road who did 3 DVDs for $5, and then it was like freely available online because you had access to the internet. And then obviously when Netflix and Amazon started coming out, and me being consciously aware that by engaging in piracy I was taking away from the industry that I wanted to work in, I started to shift my focus onto platforms that I was paying for. But like my experience of wanting to work in film and realizing the books that I'd read and the stories that I'd loved could be turned into this real tangible thing that everyone had access to. And it wasn't just their version of my story in their own head, but my version of my story on a screen for them to watch. I felt that part was really important, because if you're talking about your experiences from a marginalized community, but you're also talking to white people about that and they've never experienced it, then inside their head, whatever they come up with in their imagination will never be close to the real truth of what you're writing. And so when it comes to that, I think that having it on the screen is really important. But yeah, going back to what I was saying, like my love for film was born out of several factors all happening at the same time, and one of those factors was piracy. So whilst I understand that piracy can't go on affecting the film, and it's affecting the type of film that gets released in the industry, I think also the industry needs to start addressing it. Because at the moment,
it exists, right? Why are so many people partaking in this thing?
Exactly. Like instead of engaging with it and thinking like, look, let's like think about piracy. Let's think about the data that we can get from piracy. Like if we start asking the questions without the consequence, then we'll start to find out why people engage with piracy. And then we can start to change the industry to make it more inclusive of those people that are still engaging with piracy, not because they want to, not because it's easier or cheaper, because they have to. That's the only way they have access to film. And so like, yeah, I think that in because what we do is in the industry, we go like, oh, piracy is bad. We'll just pretend that like we just won't interact with it, it's bad, and that's it. But like I think there's more to be learned from that. And I think that simplistic way of thinking about things was fine about 10 years ago. But like we've now reached a point where we're okay with complexity. We know that there are consequences to the way that things have previously been, and we know that some of those consequences are harmful to the way that things are now, and we need to start investigating that, because data is powerful.
Data is literally there now, and we've come a long way from, there being adverts on videos being like, well, you wouldn't steal a car.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've come a long way from that, and I think, piracy is really, it's just tapped so much into accessibility that I don't think it can be ignored. I don't think it can just be a door that we're shutting and being like, well, that's bad, because what happens when we just shut those doors, right? There's never solutions made. There's never the right conversations had. And it just kind of continues to more kind of blockades and walls to be built, right? Yeah. Around the subject. And it's really interesting to me that now when we are so digital, we are so connected to the internet that, everything is there at your fingertips, right? And it's really important to figure out what that really means for people. I know, I used to just watch so many random indie films all the time. They weren't films that at that time when I was 16, 17, they were not films that I was just going to be able to be like, hey, I'm just going to go and buy this on DVD. Where do I go to get
and this is exactly it. Like when we're talking about queer film, especially, 100%. I mean, no cinemas in Birmingham really program queer film, which is exactly the reason CineQ had to exist. Like they programmed the blockbusters, like they programmed Call Me by Your Name, they programmed God's Own Country, and they programmed Moonlight. But to be honest, I haven't seen another queer film as part of the regular programming, unless you want to count I can't remember the Elton John biopic as part of the queer offering, which it really isn't. And so like, as queer film, you can either go to Clone Zone or Prowler and buy a DVD, which should become obsolete because I don't know anyone that now owns a DVD player because we have so much available on the internet. Or you can, well, now you can go to organisations directly, like Peccadillo Pictures has their own player online. But at that point, like the only way to access film was either through piracy or the few films that were made available online through like Netflix or Amazon. It's only recently that we've seen an influx of queer film, and that is because the industry is a bit backwards. So like, you have to prove that there's an appetite for something and that something can make money before money is given to making it. So what we saw was a whole lot of old queer content that was almost borderline problematic, like really kind of dealt with the stereotypes of the queer community, like shoved online because suddenly they realized they could make money out of queer people. And then because people watching those, they started to make new queer content. And what we're seeing is a huge divide between the two different types of queer film. The queer film made like in like the modern queer film made before 2000, and then the queer film made after 2000, and how different they are in stories and narratives, in like feel. And also what no one ever thinks about is the impact of a film that isn't made consciously, like, or with a conscience. So those problematic stories from the queer community, the queer people that aren't surrounded by queer people would watch those films and be like, this is what it is to be a queer person.
Right, exactly. And that is the thing, right? Is that these problematic things exist, and then someone who is trying to find themselves or explore who they are has to then engage in the problematic content, because content that is more like real, or you know, something that is a different part of the experience isn't there. So it looks like, hey, this is the monolithic thing, come and digest this, and then you're like digesting off a narrative that is coming from a like heteronormative lens. This is what it is. Every like person gets like this experience if you're queer, and it's just like, what? Because as we know, nuance, right? If you are Black and queer, that's different. If you live in a country where being queer is illegal, of course that's going to be different. If you like have a really accepting family and you've been able to step into your queerness, right? There's so many different things, and it's just really interesting how, like you said, because like it's just it can just be one kind of narrative. You know, it's really interesting, especially in kind of films where you have like, you know, white straight men playing, you know, queer characters, but it's a very specific type of queer person, you know, and using problematic language and you know, just portraying queerness around men as this is what it is to be gay, you're wearing these clothes and doing this thing, and that's that. And this is that, like, you know, that has people's experience, but when it's coming from a heteronormative lens, it's just kind of like how am I meant to see myself if the person creating this isn't even that.
And I definitely feel like the most prolific version of this is the representation of queer men being predatory in film. Because if you're watching a queer film and all of the queer men are predatory and all of the queer men are chasing straight guys and all of the queer men are behaving predatory, then you are going to take away from that and be like, in order for me to have sex with other men, I have to be predatory. And that's when it starts to feed into a really toxic place. That's when we need to kind of like think about the ways that things have previously been shaped, and also like giving context to past work, because these stories are important. The stories are important. The stereotypes within it are less important. So we really need to think about that. Like it's a typical like Plato's cave situation where like if you see it, then you know it exists. Until you see it, you don't know it exists, and that's why representation is so important. Like, and this is my experience. Like, it's very similar to my experience. I thought that like all gay men got together in a club and danced and cruised each other, and then took each other home and slept with each other, and then did it all over again the next weekend. And that's really harmful. That's like, especially in alcoholic spaces, if you tie community to like the abuse of alcohol, then that breeds a whole community of people that think the only way that they have community is if they go to a bar and drink. And that's our representation. That's the only representation we have on screen. And now we're diversifying our representation. Now we know that, queer spaces don't have to be alcoholic. Queer spaces can be art-led. Queer spaces can just be communities. So we have things like Circle in Birmingham, or even CineQ, which exists for space, but also to engage with something. And so that narrative is changing, but it still harmed a community of people that only saw themselves reflected as having fun in a club and taking random men home.
Absolutely. This kind of brings me on to my next point, which is about your kind of work around consultancy, around like inclusion, how we kind of bring those narratives, all these things that we've spoken about, how do you use those things within other parts of your work? How do you kind of promote inclusion? And also, how do you kind of go about addressing things that people don't really want to address, right? Because I think there's something here around some of the narratives around Birmingham creatives as well. When you build something from kind of like the ground up, there's always a conversation about kind of who waters the soil and who picks the flowers, right? There's something about that. So if we can just kind of touch on that, that would be really great.
Yeah, I definitely think like my work in inclusion comes from being really visible, really queer, and being really Black, but also most of it comes from hope. So I understand as one person, I can't do everything myself. So I hope that there are other people doing the work like me, and all of us together are making a shift in the industry. But also I think a lot of my work and a lot of my understanding around inclusion and what inclusion means comes from unpacking my own toxic traits. Like I consider myself to be a good person now, but I wasn't always a good person. And that's because I'd internalized a lot of absolute bullshit that I had to learn how to externalize. And I didn't realize that was affecting my actions. Now, turning that learning into formative action requires two things. It requires grit, like real perseverance and resilience, but it also requires like changeable kind of integrity. And that you have to be you have to have that integrity in every position you have. And like my relationship with Birmingham is obviously really complex at the moment, especially because sometimes you have to give up a great opportunity or give up a really good job because you need to retain your integrity. And that is hard. And I think that has really damaged my relationship to Birmingham, because there's been a few instances like throughout my career here where I've had to either sacrifice a part of myself to be able to stay in a role and do a thing that I love, or I've had to give up a role to retain my own sense of self. And the fact that even exists, especially in the arts, and especially in organizations that are supposed to be more progressive than others because they represent like marginalized communities, that's especially difficult. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the consultancy work I do in film now comes from my understanding of being queer and Black that stems from film, but also like a lot of the things that I know are common sense. I mean, I obviously I read on the subjects, and I try not to be academic at all, because I feel like academic language and an academic attitude excludes people from engaging with stuff. But I have read my fair share of literature around inclusion and around Blackness and anti-racism, but also like I have experience, and my experiences are completely logical. Like if you understand that there is an oppressed party and there is the party that does the oppression, then it's really easy to understand that the language given to that oppression, if it comes from the oppressor, is going to be incorrect, because it's a language that suits the oppressor the most and makes it so the oppressor has to do the least amount of work. Which I think like there's a fundamental understanding around the definition of racism, because people think racism is what happens when you discriminate against someone based on their race. But I don't think it is. I think racism has to be a word that is underpinned by systemic and systematic oppression or subordinates. Like, so what we're seeing at the moment is a bunch of white people saying like, well, people have been racist to me. Like, people have called me out because I'm white. And I'm like, well, yeah, but that's not really racism. That's just prejudice. People prejudice against you. And actually, given everything that's happened, given the context of everything that's happened in our world, in our history, the things that they were saying weren't actually attacks, they were more contextual. So yeah, I think that language needs to evolve, and actually language needs to, the choice of language needs to be given to oppressed communities.
And semantics are just important, right? Like when you and when you look at that in the context of a ever-changing society, when you look at that in the context of having damaging narratives, let's say around predatory queer people, you know, it then directly links into a lot of the conversations around right now of like TERFs who are kind of being like, trans women are predators, they're this, we should not be sharing the same bathroom with them, and it really connects with that othering, the semantics, if they're not right and they're not explored enough and developed enough. And also they have to kind of be flexible in some ways, in the sense that if a word comes along that makes more sense, right, if something makes more sense, I can understand why that development kind of needs to happen. And it's really important. And obviously, you know, we can speak about this forever. But just to make a like lasting point on this is, when we are kind of touching on inclusion, that inclusion has to be broad, because as people, we are so layered and complex. We can't have inclusion that says, well, this is inclusive today, and that means it's inclusive for the next 10 years. Like, it can't be.
I was having this conversation with Mal Hoyes the other day, and talking about the queer community and the Black community especially. And one of the biggest complaints about the queer community that I hear is like, what's the acronym now? LGBTPD. And I'm like,
what's the next colour of the flag?
Right. And then like, I was talking about it, and I was like, the fundamental misunderstanding here is that we live in a digital age now. So it's completely different than before. We now have a way to have conversations on an international scale for marginalized people all across the world. Before, everything that we said, everything that we did that was known internationally was censored through essentially a white organization or a cis organization or a straight organization. So it was the most palatable version of that for what was considered the status quo. Now, because we're able to have these conversations online, our language, our understanding of our community is growing at such a rate that it's constantly changing. It won't always constantly change. It will update, but it won't always constantly change. And actually, what people need to realize is that we're doing the work for our own communities. So it's not your place to turn around to us and say like, oh, you need to like calm down with the acronym. You need to like, it's not your place. We're trying to understand ourselves, and then we'll get to you. Then we'll start to talk to you about understanding us. But we need to understand ourselves first as a community. We need to understand that there are many different perspectives of being Black. We need to understand that Blackness and queerness is acceptable. We need to understand that the attitudes in the Black community around queerness stem from colonialism, stem from religious colonialism. We need to understand that about ourselves. We need the information to be able to accept that, so we can figure out who we are as a community. And then we'll show a united front, because we know as marginalized communities that if we don't show like a united front, they'll all just turn around and tear us down. They'll be like, look, they can't even decide amongst themselves what's going on. And so we ain't trying to do that. It's the status quo that's sticking their nose into our business and trying to make sense of what's going on at the moment. Like, no one asked you to.
Right, and that's right, yeah, here we are. I'm going to go on to the next bit of our conversation now. And I've decided to title this segment and it's called, it's a quote, I'm quoting you, okay, the title is a quote of you. Being behind the scenes of film is like being the can't say that word.
Choreographer. Yeah.
Writer. And that was something that kind of came up in a conversation we're having around kind of your journey from being in a like performance, more of a performance space, but also like writing, and then kind of combining these two things, right, into a new experience for you. So we are going to play a short clip from Sweet Mother. While I set this up, Rico, if you could just speak a little bit about Sweet Mother, and then I'll kind of go into the clip that I wanted to show.
Yeah, so Sweet Mother is a BFI Network supported film that was written and directed by the wonderful CineQ. It has had a festival run, so it premiered at BFI Flair. It then went on to Florence Queer Festival, Scottish Queer International Film Festival, Leeds International Film Festival, Bolton Film Festival, and many more. It's basically the story of a well, yeah. I'll talk about the story after.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we're just going to watch about 3 minutes of it, and I chose, so the whole film is about 15 minutes, but I've chosen these kind of 3 minutes because this scene already touches on things that we've spoken about, but I think it's really important to see this kind of like connection around the intersex, I guess.
Mom, please. Don't have to pray for me. That's not what you think.
I know what I saw, Efosa. Are you now a lie on top of everything else? Eh? How can you believe in sin and then you ask me not to pray for you?
Mama, I beg.
So you are gay?
Oh, I mean, you don't understand.
I don't believe this. My own son. Gay. Lord.
So what if I was? Like, it doesn't change who I am.
What do you mean? What do you mean it doesn't change who you are? What do you mean? Eh?
I'm not, Mama. Gay.
No. Do you want to catch AIDS?
Mom!
Do you know how difficult life would be for you? Eh? You're already black. And then you want to add sodomy on top of that. Eh? I should have known. Look at your face. Look at all the piercing. Eh?
Do you think I just chose this? I was fearfully and wonderfully made by God.
No, Efosa. Don't you dare go there. The God that I serve would never make you this way. Never! Oh, no. God. What do you think your father would say, eh? When he hears that his firstborn son is here, acting like a girl.
I'm not acting like a girl. I'm a man, and I've always been a man. I'll always be a man.
I sacrificed my career to bring you and your sister here, only for you to be corrupted by the Western ways. Now your father and his stupid wife will sit down there judging me for your own actions. Is that fair? Is that fair?
Forget him. Mama, if you truly loved me, you would try. You try to understand. You try to accept.
No! I will never accept this, Efosa. Hear me well. You are an abomination. You have brought shame onto the entire family. Can't believe this. And with the Pakistani, no less.
So I'm just going to stop that right there. So a few things to unpack. Let me try and get in the light. So yeah, I watched that this morning, and there's so many different kind of little bits that I want to touch on. But one of the things for me was also how it touched on a different kind of intersect, right? Where we're then we're seeing a Black gay man with his mom, who is obviously quite religious. And just a bit of context as well, the scene before was a scene where his mom actually saw him kissing someone, a man, basically. But in this scene, right at the end, what's really interesting is this like idea of 1, you're gay, 2, you're black, but 3, and with someone who isn't the same race as you. And there's something really important about that narrative, because from, I guess, my perspective as a queer person, there is, yes, sometimes how things are kind of like stacked up. It is kind of like, you're this and you're this. Wow, really? And there's something about that I think people can understand in some ways. Then I think when you're adding now the intersect of not only all of these things, but then your family not even wanting you to like date outside of your race, outside of your culture, it brings kind of to the forefront the way that so many kind of like oppressive kind of like systems are in play, right, all at once. And it's almost like a really layered way of like looking at the ways that like culture as well isn't allowed to cross over in some ways. And there's something, for me anyway, that's interesting there, because it's kind of like when we're looking at like queer narratives, we cannot just look at it as a monolith, because we are also looking at race as well. We are looking at kind of gender too. We're looking at all of these kind of areas all at once. And there was something even about like the necklace that the character was wearing. I feel like it kind of reminded me of like a Black Panther type vibe. And there's something connected to that, right, in the way that you are connecting to your own hero inside, almost your own external perfect world, right, where you're like getting all your powers of who you are, and you are like here standing really strong in that. And, you know, in that scene as well, we kind of heard bits about shame, right? What's your dad going to think now? People are going to think it's my fault as a parent that you're like this. And that's something that it happens, right? And there can be so much space for family members to be accepting. However, there's also that thing of they take on the shame that they think you have and create that for themselves too.
Yeah.
It's really interesting about that dynamic, and that really like struck me, especially when, you know, like you can or we've heard stories of queer people kind of saying, yeah, but my parent had like a friend who was queer, and that's why I thought it was going to be okay for me to come out, and then actually everyone's like freaking out. So yeah, Sweet Mother, it was just a really like amazing kind of short film to watch today, because it just kind of put things into a different type of perspective. It would be nice to kind of just hear what it was like for you working on that, and then we'll go into CineQ.
I think, yeah, so there's a couple of things I want to pick up from what you just said. I think that what's interesting about this particular scene and the story generally is like, one, it's biographical. Xena, they put a lot of their experiences into writing the script. But also the thing that really compelled me to work on it as a producer is the fact that I found so much of my story in it as well. Like, this is universal, and actually like even the nuances, because like, you know, when we're talking about like dating outside of the race, specifically in the South Asian community, there has been historically, especially with first generation immigrants of both communities, anti-race, like anti-blackness, and also like anti-South Asianness, I guess, between the communities. And that's probably because of the westernization and the expectation that we as communities had to assimilate. So actually there was this narrative that wasn't made by us, that we had to fight for resources, which made us pitted against each other. And that I find that really interesting, and like something that like Xena actually tried to explore, even just slightly, I find is really interesting. Additionally, I think that yeah, religion is such an interesting thing in these cases because it's so interlinked with shame, and religion as a vehicle to control is inherently bad, but religion isn't inherently bad. And the way that it's been changed and shifted, because if we look at religion generally, like religion said it was okay for us to be enslaved. In fact, the original Christianity said we should be enslaved. And they, I mean, using Christianity to like control a whole like populace of people, it's really interesting that that's now the narrative that is creating so much homophobia in the Black community. But yeah, in terms of like working on this film, it was an incredible experience actually, because well, for one, Kemi and Tolu are incredible. Like their chemistry together and the way they work together, like Kemi kept pulling the emotions out, and it was awe-inspiring to watch. Absolutely awe-inspiring, because remember, like that take isn't the only take we did several, and every single time they're pulling out the emotions. Every single time it felt like they were son and mom and son. Yeah, big love for Kemi. But also the way that the set was made up, it was basically made up of a lot of really skilled people and a few people that didn't know what they were doing, including me as a producer, because I produced events before, and I did a bit of work on set but never as a producer. So really this was all learning for me. And what really made the set amazing is that it felt like home. And also big up Paul Stringer for his big energy. He was our second AC, and his energy on set was just extraordinary. So yeah, it was a really kind of like humbling experience to see talent being like almost condensed into this beautiful little short that had such an emotional resonance with me and a lot of the people that were on our set, because we ran a very representational set.
Amazing. There's also something that I just want to touch on, and just before we kind of move away from Sweet Mother, but it's this scene here. So I didn't show this in the clip. However, there's this really beautiful kind of point where you see this like young boy like touching some clothes across like a wardrobe. And then the shot is kind of like him sitting there, like looking away, which you can see in this image here. And then it just quickly flicks to him looking at himself in the mirror. And there's something so like impactful. That's probably not the best word to use, but there's just something so striking about these shots here, because it's almost this moment of like thinking about who you are or what you are, where you fit in, and you're just kind of there in that moment, and then to just look and see yourself in this mirror. But also the fact that the audience is always looking at this young boy in this particular scene. It's almost like you are with him there. And I think I really resonated with this moment, because there's something, and later on in the film, you kind of see the interaction between, is this one of the lead characters' younger brother? That's the impression that I got? Is that right?
It's his sister's son.
Okay, so it's his nephew.
Yeah.
There's like this like tension moment, right, of like masculinity and manhood that happens, and you kind of see this like internalized, like almost like homophobia in a way that pours out, right? That says you're a young boy, like you shouldn't be like wearing like a woman's clothes, because there's a scene where he has on like a scarf and some heels and kind of walks into the living room. It's this moment where everyone's just like, you know, there's something about that tension, and you feel it here before it happens. It's like this scene like gives you that tension, you know something is coming.
I think if like we look at Rowan's eyes, and like we see it's that question of like, when does the shame start? Like, when do you start to internalize that homophobia? When do you start to internalize that racism? And like in this scene, he's doing something that feels so natural to him, like, because obviously he's doing it naturally. Like he's walking in, he's like running his hands through the garments, he's like looking at the makeup, all these things that he wouldn't see in his day-to-day life, he's now got access to, and it interests him. And he's like, let me play with it, like children play. But even in this moment, looking in this mirror, he knows there's something wrong, and that's because of the culture that he's been surrounded by. And that's only exacerbated when the next scene comes up, and there is that kind of like tension between the child and Ifosa around masculinity and around whether or not this is acceptable. And the shame element of it again is not only just like in the atmosphere, in the like around him, but he's made to feel shameful about what he's doing.
Right, and it's a mirror of the two. Older, queer, gay man saying these things to a young boy wearing a heel and scarf, right?
And it's also like in the scene, like you can see the picture of Ifosa is next to the mirror where he's looking at himself in. Like, yeah, that's the picture of young Tully. So it's almost like it is a reflection, like it is like looking at my older self. But then when it's also about Tully, it's also about Fosa, like the characters of Fosa. It's also about Fosa realizing that like he has that internalized homophobia, but then again it's exacerbated in the next scene when, you know, him and his boyfriend or male lover are talking about where to go to dinner, and like he's like, I want to go out, and Ifosa's like, how about I cook for you instead? Like it's that kind of constant undercurrent, which makes it even worse when he's confronted in that scene by his mom about his sexuality and makes a choice to come out, because he's come out but he still has all of this internalized homophobia. He's come out but he still has all this stuff that he's carrying. Like the journey doesn't end with him coming out. He's not suddenly unburdened by opening his mouth and saying he's gay. And I think that's something that is really important in this message.
So important. I think a lot of people do think that, right? You come out and it's fine, that's the burden done, and you've done the thing, and it's like, it's this, I feel so uncomfortable about even using the term coming out, right? But I'm sure you get what I'm saying, right? Because it's this thing of, surprise, I'm here, and actually like I've always been here. I haven't actually been hiding, like my body's been here, right?
Exactly. Here. It's framed as like this second birth, and it's not a second birth at all. Like it's a constant thing. And things like coming out day like just put so much pressure on people to come out regardless of their situation. And
I think coming out day can also do this thing where it says like, you're not queer unless people know it.
Right.
And there's something about that is really, really problematic and troubling. And I think it puts people in this place where they're almost like, I'm being fake to myself because no one else knows. It's like, you know, there's something around that. It doesn't allow for conversation because
it demonizes people that aren't ready to come out. It demonizes people that aren't ready to live in their truth. And it's fine because people have situations that don't allow that. What are people supposed to do if they are in family situations where if they come out they're going to be made homeless? Are they supposed to come out but then also, and if they don't come out, deal with the shame of the gay community of the fact that they didn't come out? Like, why are you making it harder for people who already have it hard? Like, why?
100%, I totally agree. So we're going to go into the Q&A, and I'm going to kind of tie this in with CineQ, because a question that we've got is about kind of CineQ, but also queer Black stories in film. So my kind of question is, when you are going into CineQ, or I know obviously you do programming for Shout, what is it that you go into it thinking? Like, how do you go into that curation? What kind of stories are you trying to kind of tell? So there's that. And then the question that's come in is around like, from your experience of curating, what intersectional stories are missing? What stories of Black joy would you like love to see or make yourself?
I will answer those questions in reverse because it's easier for me to talk about what films or what I have not seeing and what I want to make. I want to make films about Blackness and mental health. I think that the stigma that is slowly disappearing in white communities isn't disappearing at all in Black communities, and there's still loads of shame attached to having bad mental health. And there are also like really specific issues that affect the Black community that exacerbate mental health, and no one's talking about it. So I definitely feel like that's an intersection that's missing. Also, I think still feel like Black trans stories aren't there, especially Black trans men.
Yeah,
Stories from that community just aren't there. And going back to the first question, when I start to program, I think what I start out with is an idea of what would feel fresh to me. And in film it's a lot easier because I used to work for the last 5 years. I've watched 2 films a day. That went down in the last year to 1 film a day, so that's a lot of films that I watched.
wow.
So I think with film I feel more confident to be like, oh, I haven't seen anything like this before, so it's definitely fresh. Rather with queer arts and culture, there's so much that I haven't seen, so it's really about like my one position that I did that in was Shout, and I had seen a lot from Shout, and I knew what the program was for Shout. So it's about bringing new stories to the city, but also like, so it's like with programming in any regard, it's equally about supporting the artist as it is about programming the art, because there's so little development opportunities in our community for queer people that we really need to pay attention to. I mean, this is a thing, like if an incredible queer artist made like a great story about what it was to be an older lesbian in, I don't know, in America or whatever, and then the year after they brought out an incredible story about what it was like to move to a new country and the cultural divide in the queer community. Both of those stories are super interesting. However, we've supported that artist. I mean, would we want to support them 2 years in a row? Like, what does that look like, and what does that mean? So yeah, I think there's something interesting around that. Am I still here? Because I think you've frozen, Danny. Hello? But yeah, in terms of like what I want to program and what I want to develop, in terms of what I want to program and what I want to develop, there's definitely like a need for more diverse queer stories and a better complexity of queer stories. I'm looking at the intersections and not just one intersection. I don't just want to look at Blackness and queerness. I want to look at Blackness, queerness, mental health. I want to look at disability. There isn't enough out there for disability at all. And I think like as a community, we're still scared to talk about disability. And also we see disability as such an inherently negative thing, especially in like cis male queer males, because I think as a community we're so enamored by sexuality and perfection and what we look like and how we present, that disability doesn't suit the narrative around that, which is disgusting. And so going back to what I was saying about what you see is what you know you can be, what you aspire to be, and representation being of utmost importance. I think that these stories such as, you know, queerness and disability, queerness, race and disability, queerness, race and mental health are really, really important to developing those. So yeah, that is my answer.
Thank you. I actually just got cut off there for a moment, but I'm back. Thank you for that. Rico, I also wanted to just kind of put up some images from CineQ as well, just before we kind of come to the end, I guess. I wanted to really speak about in terms of the stories within queer film, what have some of your kind of highlights been, like, of the work that you've done? What kind of things have really made you be like, oh yeah, that's like a moment, that was a thing, that was like me in my element, or you in your element with other people? What does that, what are some of those moments?
I definitely, there's one that pops up into my head, which is the one that got away, because I was planning to have a screening of Marlon T. Riggs's Tongues Untied, with like a Caribbean cooking workshop, because I was really aware that, especially as someone that is estranged from their parents, like when you are Black and you come out as queer and you are estranged from your family, you also lose your culture. Like, because we live in a Western world, our culture isn't freely accessible. And before like a digital age where we could re-access our culture, like it was lost to us forever. Like we would have to start assimilating and be as white as possible to be able to survive in the world. And what I really wanted to do was find a space to reintroduce some of the skills, some of the cultural skills that may have been lost through being ostracized from people's families. And so I wanted to pair this, like this film, this 59-minute film, maybe 1 hour and 2 minute film about like loving yourself and that self-love and not letting yourself be erased by the need to assimilate, and also that loving another Black person is revolutionary, because if you can love another Black person, not exclusively Black people, but if you can love another Black person, it means that you don't have internalized racism, because you're able to love someone that is the same race as you, and that kind of like is a revolutionary act in itself. So yeah, to create this space that was like very, very Black and very kind of like nurturing was a real point of excitement for me. But then we had to cancel because coronavirus happened. So, but but outside of that, I really love Rafiki. Yeah, really loved Rafiki at the Mac. I love working with the Mac actually, because they're incredible. And I think we're going to work with them more when coronavirus ends and things reopen, not in a kind of festival capacity, but just in a general capacity. David, the programmer there, is incredible and really open to making queer film more of a staple at the Mac, which is definitely needed. But yeah, just having this like this story of Black joy, but also Black trauma on screen, on the big screen at Mac, was really transformative. And it was one of our first events that we kind of went from Centrala or Mockingbird to the Mac, which was like quite a big jump. But also, okay, controversially, one of my most enjoyable experiences is a film that we screened called Sauvage, which is, the English title is Wild, and it's about a French sex worker who, after a period of time struggling with, I guess, his life and where he wants to be and what he wants to do, and trying out different things, realizing that he preferred to be wild, he preferred to be a savage, I guess. And there's a scene in it where he has to sit on a giant butt plug, because he's with these two people who are really into fetish, and he's been hired as a sex worker, and they're like, well, sit on it, and he looks at the thing and he goes to sit on it. But like that scene, which is very explicitly queer, very graphic, on the big screen at the Mac, for me was a bit of a like, oh right, this feels like a queer space in this moment, because even though the scene itself is quite harrowing, it's explicitly clear. Explicitly queer. And so for that reason, I think that screening, like for me, was like a bit, it was a big thing. It was like, yes, I've managed to queer this space. I've managed to make this space queer, rather than bring queer people into a space that is essentially not queer.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I guess as well, like there's like loads of like films and documentaries that are so harrowing, like literally like so harrowing. And it's really interesting, right, when there's something that is brought to screen on a huge screen that is like not harrowing in the way that like people are literally being like murdered or blood and whatever squirting out people's necks, but it's still kind of something that is like still very like shocking. In a way, in an interesting way of it being shocking, right? And there's something about like being in that space, seeing that scene in particular, and then being like, look, other things can be on screen too, which are equally like, I don't know, shocking or whatever. But it's really interesting when that happens, right? It's like, yeah, it's a moment of being like, oh, okay, cool. Like this can be here on screen, right? And we can still watch these like things. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. I think like also to add to the films that I felt really powerful and like I felt really good about when I screened them is Shakedown, which is a film about a like a queer woman's like strip club in LA, and just
So
that was on at the
so good. I love. Oh my god, Shakedown. Shakedown.
Like, just female celebration, like Black female celebration, is what it's all about, because literally Black women are a dream. They are the dream.
The thing that gets me about Shakedown as well, which I think is just really wonderful, is the way that it is so unapologetic, right? You've got like so many different types of like women and like the queerness within Black spaces, but you don't often see that like in a female-led kind of lens, or like people that are like butch lesbians, but who were also like actually the security at the place, or actually going to explore this like part of like performance where they're like taking their clothes off or whatever. It's this like moment where we kind of like really deconstructs how we like look at like butchness, for instance. And that in itself is really, really, really interesting. I love Shakedown. It was one of my favorite parts of the programming, to be honest. I thought it was amazing. It just breaks down gender.
And also puts the ownership of empowerment in the power in women's hands. And I think that's what, like, we did 2 shorts programs, and both of them we got women to program them. Like, I am not in a position to program a shorts program that celebrates women. And I think that ethos should be carried across the board when it comes to programming. I think like there is no reason why in this day and age we can't get people from a specific community or experience to come in and just
like, hey, tell us what this is. It's literally your life experience. I totally agree with that, and just empowering people to do that, right, and supporting people to do that in the spaces that they can. It's really important. So Rico, we've come to the end of our talk. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Thank you so much. This talk has just like really filled me today, and I really just appreciate the openness that you've kind of like brought to the conversation, and I hope that everyone here who is with us in Zoom, also watching on YouTube, has enjoyed this. Yeah, amazing. I'm just gonna talk through what's happening on the final episode in this series. So yes, thank you so much, Rico. Thank you. Bye. So we will be having Zakia Mackenzie on the Settee, exploring the local environment is the title of this talk, and we will be touching on stories around the kind of natural environment and the climate conversation, and how using stories has really been able to get people into that conversation, people that are often left out of the climate conversation, people that are in communities that actually, you know, it's more important to speak about how the climate is affecting local like economies and communities rather than on a massive global scale. So I'm really looking forward to speaking to Zakia about this, and yeah, it's going to be really great. And that talk is not next week, but the week after, and the date has come out of my head, which is not very good. If someone could post that in the chat, that would be amazing. But yeah, thank you all so much for for just kind of bringing the energy to this talk. Thank you so much for all the questions that you've sent through as well. So yes, tune in back with us on the Settee and with Zakia on the 13th of March, 2 p.m. till 3:15. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.